94.3 The Dude is very grateful to our men and women in uniform. We're proud to recognize local members of our military by turning the spotlight on them right now in our Soldier Salute.
I'm your host, Sergeant First Class Retired Don Sorensen, and on today's Soldier Salute, we've got South Carolina Air National Guard veteran Bill Walker. Bill, tell me about yourself.
Well, I'm retired. I've retired from two careers, one in state government for 30 years, and another I worked for a U.S. congressman. But since then, I've become very busy with volunteer organizations, everything from church to military organizations, Patriot Guard riders, and my wife thinks I'm crazy, but I stay gone a lot. I joined the Air Force and the Air National Guard in 1968. And my family had been in the Air Force, my father in World War II, and my brother before me, my older brother. And I went to Texas like everybody in the Air Force. I spent a good bit of time in San Antonio and Shepherd Field in Wichita Falls. And I tease sometimes that the closest I came to combat was in a bar in San Antonio. So I was very fortunate. I stayed in the United States, never had to leave. And most of my time was at McIntyre Air National Guard Base.
Bill, you served during the Vietnam War era, but had the good fortune of not having to go overseas. Tell me a little bit about what that time was like for you.
Well, I was also in college at the same time, and it was a little bit unnerving to see riots on college campuses, but yet I was in the military. So at times you had to weigh what was going on. I went to a small college, Newberry College, and it was a very peaceful campus while the University of South Carolina had riots. So what we saw in the news, it was a lot of in-your-face violence and death and bombings, and a lot of people didn't like that. A lot of my friends thought that we were crazy to be in that. But the options, in my opinion, were none. We had to be involved.
Bill, I have an aviation background myself, and when you mention being military and aviation, people either assume that you were a pilot or you were a mechanic. But you were Air National Guard, kind of information technology before we really knew what information technology was. Tell me about that.
Well, Don, I was a communication center specialist, and they sat me in front of a teletype machine. And I would bet that most of your audience has never heard of a teletype machine.
Absolutely not.
Right. It's a very clunky typewriter type, and it cuts a tape with holes in it that is read with little pins. It's called Hollerith code. And while I was very good at it, most of that work was not in a nice building. It was on the back of a deuce-and-a-half truck in a steel box. That's where all of our equipment was. We also had radios.
Bill, basic training has changed a lot over the years, and now you had mentioned to me that your closest combat experience was in a bar in San Antonio, Texas. I think a lot of us have probably had similar experiences, but let's do a throwback. Talk to me about what training and being in the military was like back at that era.
Well, basic training hasn't changed that much. We had to run, we had to shoot, we had to do pull-ups, we had to get up early, we had to polish shoes, we had to make beds, just like everybody else. You were told everything and everything to do, everything to think. We were very fortunate. We had a good group of people that did what they were told, so we got along very well with our sergeant. When we had our first leave out of basic training, our sergeant briefed us. He said, "Look, guys, you all haven't had any alcohol for several weeks, and about the first 2 beers are going to put you on your behinds." And we said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "And whatever you do when you go into town, do not go to Flood Street. Flood Street." So we got in the cab, and what's the first thing we said? "Do you know how to get to Flood Street?" Well, as it turns out, the sergeant was correct. We had no business on Flood Street. A couple of fights ensued, and we got away relatively unscathed, but the advice from the sergeant was correct.
Bill, after you left the military, you continued some government service, and it sounds like you probably had a pretty interesting career. I bet you could tell some stories about that.
Well, Don, I started to work in the Department of Social Services only because I had a neighbor that was a retired major, and he was the personnel director for the agency at that time. And I literally was sitting on his porch with him drinking a beer. And he said, well, look, you're about to graduate. What you going to do? And I said, well, I got summer camp. I'm going to get that over with, and I'll start looking for a job. And he said, I got someone I want you to go talk to. And on my last day in uniform, I went and talked to the county director for Horry County DSS. I'm a grunt in uniform, and I'm sitting there being interviewed. And he said, when can you start? And I was a little shocked, and I said, when do you need me? This was Friday afternoon. He said, Monday. The career goes on from there, but it ended up, I was the county director in Lexington County DSS. Had about 100 employees, did everything from child abuse to food stamps. Saw some very good stories, some successes, and saw some very bad things happen. That was a very fulfilling career. I retired from there and went to work for a congressman as his special assistant. And my job was working with veterans and military, where I got to help people with benefits, with awards and medals that they needed and never received for some reason. And there were some World War II guys that were very special people to meet with and talk to.
Bill, you've hung up the uniform and you've retired twice, but you're not done yet. You're still volunteering with an organization that's very near and dear to your heart. Tell me about Wreaths Across America.
Wreaths Across America started at Arlington, and this now is expanded across the nation at virtually all of the national cemeteries. The notion is to place a wreath on every grave site in every national cemetery. I think there are probably between 800,000 and 1 million wreaths going to be distributed this year. At Fort Jackson National Cemetery on December 15th of this year, there will be a ceremony, and after that ceremony, the wreaths will be in place at the end of each row. The families get to go first and place the wreaths on their particular family members, and then everyone else helps and place wreaths on all of the grave sites. It's a very impressive thing, and it's a very moving thing for me to see. What people don't realize, the cemetery is only about a decade old. I think it started in 2008. And the first year we did this, we needed 350 wreaths. This year we need 6,500. The sponsorship for these wreaths comes from individuals and some companies, and frankly, we're a little bit behind. And we need some help to make sure every gravesite has a wreath. Got about 4 weeks left. We have about the third week in November. We need to have all the orders in because they have to go to Maine and they have to be shipped down here by truck.
Bill, I'm going to make it a little bit easy on our listeners out there. What I'm going to do, you've provided me with a PDF. If our listeners will go to our Soldier Salute link on the 94.3 The Dude website, they'll be able to follow that link to the PDF, and they'll be able to fill it out and submit it, and hopefully we can get some donations in here for those wreaths.
Don, on that form, I need to point out there is an address there, and it's a West Columbia address. It's on the form pretty clearly, so that's where any donations need to be mailed.
Bill, it sounds to me like you've had an amazing life, and a lot of it, I feel, you can probably attribute back to what the military, the tools that they provided you with. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how the military made you a success?
Most people think the military just trains you to fight. That's not all they do. A couple of things that they taught me was loyalty, trust, and respect, and a great deal of leadership. And in the positions I've been in, even the volunteer organizations, all of those characteristics are very important. I don't know that I would have learned those any other way. My father was a good military man, and he taught me a lot of that. But it really comes home when that drill sergeant is helping you understand.
Thanks for joining us in our Soldier Salute, presented by Little Pigs Barbecue. Serving Columbia since 1963 with that bodacious buffet. By Lexington Guns and Shooting Range. Veteran owned and operated. By Carolina Honda Powerhouse. Motorcycles, ATVs, and side-by-sides with discounts for all military personnel. And Dominion Energy. We depend on